Being old and active. Lonely.
Ik ben Mustafa Sherbetçi. Ik kom vandaan in Turkije, in Istanbulstad. Ik ken in Istanbul muziek spelen en gezien Hollandse vrouw.
I am Mustafa Sherbetçi. I come from Turkey, Istanbul. In Istanbul, I play music and meet a woman from Holland. I love honey. I write letters and phone her. She says to me, "Mustafa, why don't you come here?" Then in 1988 I go. First we live together and then we get married. But a month later the doctor says she has cancer. 11 years she's sick and in 1999 she died. August. The 5th of August my wife died. Then I'm depressed. I'm alone, single.
1999 overleden, augustus, 5 augustus, overleden, mijn vrouw. En dan, ik ben depressief, dan, ik ben alleen, nu is tijd. Kendimi yalnız hissetmediğim zamanlar, müzik dinlediğim zamanlar, kitap okuduğum zamanlar.
The moments I don't feel lonely are the moments when I listen to music, when I read books, and I'm busy with my hobbies. When I listen to music, I don't feel lonely.
Lisanım yok işte, en kötü şanssızlığım benim.
It was bad luck that I didn't learn to speak Dutch. I fell ill, lower back trouble, and I had to lie down a lot. My wife's illness and that I had to spend most of my time looking after her, that made it difficult for me to learn Dutch. It is not an excuse, but it was impossible. That was my biggest mistake, to come to Holland and not learn the language. I hope it won't be like that for others in my situation. My advice is, in the first place, as the Dutch want, learn the language. And in whatever way, no matter how old you are, what kind of work you do, you must have a hobby.
De meeste ouderen, de kinderen die wonen niet bij hun, die hebben de Nederlandse mentaliteit.
With most older people, their children don't live with them. They adopt it the Dutch way. When they are 18, they have to leave. But in Chinese culture, children stay at home longer. But these children studied in Holland and then moved out, and the parents stayed behind and were at home on their own, getting lonelier by the day. Some are alone, others are married, but they still felt the need to live with other older people and share their lives. We also have a Chinese club for the elderly, Tung Lok, where they can come by each day and play cards or chat or do other things. Then they don't feel so lonely, and every now and then the children come to pick them up or visit them at weekends.
Er zal ongetwijfeld eenzaamheid voorkomen onder Molukse ouderen. Maar dat is een best...
Undoubtedly there is loneliness among older Malaccan people, but this is quite a difficult issue to discuss, especially if they have many children who come to visit less often than they would actually like them to. Then that is very painful to talk about or to admit. It's not so apparent on the outside, probably because of the taboo, but the many voluntary groups that these older Moluccans have set up for themselves are organizing all kinds of activities to get this to the surface and do something with it.
De migratieachtergrond kan bijdragen aan het gevoel van eenzaamheid.
Their immigration background may contribute to their sense of loneliness as they see their age group diminish. Then they have the idea that there are few people left who they can talk to about the past, or can talk to in their own language, or can exchange old recipes with. These may seem small things, but you do see that the world of older people gets smaller, and that this has to do with the past.
Om eenzaamheid een beetje tegen te gaan, was het juist.
To reduce their loneliness, it was really good that there were different daycare activities for which no referral was needed. And now this kind of care has been transferred to the municipalities within the law called WMO. And so it should have been possible to organize this type of care in a more flexible way. And I think it's a rather difficult thing now because of the money, the facilities, and also the partners you need to find to organize this care. It shouldn't be such an effort.
Om dat op te zetten, dat zou best wat soepeler mogen.
Als je praat over...
When you talk about the residential care provided by the Nusantara Foundation, then you see that family ties are very important. The Indonesian community is a very close-knit community. They go to see each other, not only at birthdays, but also at other occasions. Just be with your mum and dad. You see, in our culture, that is cherished, that you go by during meal times and have a meal together. And you notice, of course, that in our home, there are also people who are lonely. And that has partly to do with age. We regularly have people in our organization who are over 100 years old. And that is a great thing, of course. But if you're so old, then the disadvantage is that people around you have gone, that even your children have died. They would be in their 70s or 80s if you are 100 years old. Well, how are you going to cope with this? What you see is that this joint grief is shared by the other residents and therefore is given significance. And besides the loss of relationships and surroundings, you can also link loneliness to a feeling of displacement that people experience. It increasingly becomes more important where you come from as you're getting older. As I already said about the former Dutch East Indies, this no longer exists. And then you feel the loneliness that you had to leave that country behind to be here in the Netherlands.
Ik kom hier ongeveer 1,5 jaar. Ik was thuis, heel eenzaam en door vrienden.
I have been coming here for about a year and a half. I was very lonely at home, and through friends who had called me to say that there was a walk-in where elderly people can go, I decided to go and check it out myself. And once I'd seen it, I stayed there. I think it's very nice, because if you're at home, you're lonely, you have no one to talk to. Because I'm alone, I go by regularly. And it is a very good organization for the elderly. I go 4 times a week, and I really enjoy myself. We do a lot of things here together, crafts and all sorts of things.
4 maal per week. En ik amuseer me heel best. We doen heel veel daar. Handenarbeid, van alles en nog wat.
Hoe ouder je wordt, hoe meer je teruggaat in de tijd van vroeger.
The older you get, the more you go back to past times. And then it is very pleasant to be taken care of in an environment that is familiar to you. Take, for example, Dutch elderly people from the Amsterdam Jordaan, which was a working-class area. They would not want to go to a chic daycare walk-in in Wassenaar, for example. Well, that is also true for the elderly from various ethnic backgrounds. The Moroccan people want to be together, to be among themselves. The Surinamese, the Afro-Surinamese older people want the same. And so there are different ethnic walk-ins. The advantage of this is that you see them thrive. They can express themselves in their own language, in their own culture, and that is what matters. It is about how we can ensure that elderly people grow old in a good way, in a healthy way, with a quality of life that is still available to them.
Na het overlijden van mijn moeder, ik heb maar 1 kind, die is getrouwd. Ze heeft haar
After my mother's death, I only have 1 child who is married, and she has her own family. and then I felt so lonely. And when I was approached by Mrs. May, because I knew her from the Dijkzicht Hospital, and she said, "You know what? We're starting a walk-in for the elderly here. Wouldn't you like to join?" I said, "Yes, that's okay. It might be good. Let me think about it." But then I thought, why not do it? Otherwise you are alone at home all day. I said, "You know what? I'll come." Then she picked me up and we went round. I thought, wait a minute, let me have a good look first. I dropped by a few times. Then I thought, no, this is it. You have to do it. And I did, and I've never regretted it.
Ik zal mijn leeftijdsgenoten, misschien iets jonger en mijn leeftijd en misschien wat ouder, oproepen om zo'n...
I'm going to call on my peers, maybe a little younger or maybe a little older, to go to such a club, a walk-in club, that they don't have to stay at home on their own. Because when you stay at home on your own, you wilt away. But when you visit such a club, your thoughts, your way of thinking changes, because you're no longer lonely. You don't feel lonely. You are with others. You're up and about.
Je voelt je niet meer eenzaam. Je bent tussen anderen. Je bent tussen mensen.
Onze doelstelling met deze groepen is om ouderen zo lang mogelijk zelfstandig te kunnen blijven laten wonen.
The aim of these groups is to have the elderly live on their own as long as possible. But on the other hand, we also want to relieve family carers. And we also try to maintain their health for as long as possible by the activities that are on offer. We encourage them to take exercise, for example. They go for walks, they can do Nordic walking, or join gymnastics for the elderly. Once a week they have physio fitness. So all these activities ensure that older people start to feel better, and therefore will have fewer health complaints. And yes, in the end, also feel happier.
Deze activiteiten zorgen ervoor dat de ouderen zich beter gaan voelen en dus ook minder gezondheidsklachten zullen gaan vertonen en ook zich prettig in hun vel voelen. Hij weet wat elk nuttig zijn, vertrouw het aan zijn wijsheid vrij. Wij zien ook dat het concept van
We also see that the concept of our walk-in daycare works very well. We see that people who arrive, some have been referred to us by care services, others by their own community, have heard about us through friends of friends. And then they arrive with several complaints: insomnia, loss of appetite, well, generally feeling low. They really come in with, well, I was sent, or I just want to see what it is like, with the idea, once I've been, I don't have to go anymore. But what we see is that they do not want to leave at all, that they would like to come by every day. For us, that is a sign that we're providing a good service, that we're meeting the needs of the elderly.
Van deze ouderen dus ook in hun behoeften voorzien.
Als ik gewoon de tips voor Marokkaanse ouderen mag geven, dan
If I could just give some advice to older Moroccan people, then I would now say, well, don't stay at home when you're old or starting to get older. Don't go and hide behind the curtains. Get up and go out. Apply for voluntary work. Just look and see where voluntary work is needed. You could even go to the hospital and ask, could I do something for the older Moroccans who come here? Go to a home for the elderly or to a nursing home to see if you can do something for those people. Just go to a home for disabled people. Work with them, as long as you don't hide behind the curtains or say, I'm done, nobody needs me. No, we're all needed. Each one of us has a role to play in society, as long as they're physically and mentally up to it. And then you can make a difference for those people who really can't do anything anymore. If I were to advise older people who are at home on their own, then my first piece of advice would actually be the hardest, because they have to be able to talk about it. You should tell someone about it. And I see that elderly people who, when they were still active, didn't socialize much outside the Malaccan community, won't do that. even if they're slowly getting more isolated. So actually I would like to give this piece of advice to the people who are still a bit younger and healthier, that they should be on the lookout for people who might be lonely within their community. The action will really have to come from that group.
Als je in dit land, hoef je niet eenzaam te zijn.
In this country, you don't have to be lonely, but you need to be brave enough to take part in what society has to offer. Do it your own way. Make sure it feels good and suits your personality. Just be yourself and you'll be all right. So that's why I would like to advise everyone, don't stay at home, but give it a try. It's good not to be lonely. Volunteers.
In Nederland is om mee te doen aan alles wat de samenleving te bieden heeft.
In the Netherlands, it is policy to participate in everything society has to offer. And it is a fact that the Netherlands is a country of volunteers. The general picture is that there are not enough migrants who participate in voluntary work. Well, that picture is totally wrong. Just look at the voluntary aid among older migrants. They do a lot within their own circle. Look at all the cultural activities. If you knew how many volunteers are involved, and once you're involved, your whole family is involved.
En als je eenmaal daarmee bezig bent, dan doet je hele familie mee.
Vrijwilligerswerk rondom Molukse ouderen wordt eigenlijk niet zo gezien.
Voluntary work in relation to older Moluccan people is actually not seen that way. I once took a management course in voluntary work, and then I thought, we don't do that at all. And when we went into it a bit further, I saw that we had actually been doing that for quite some time. Except that it is so normal for us to be there for each other that we call it by a different name.
Ik vind alles fijn. Ik vind die oudjes prachtig.
I like everything about it. I think these oldies are great, you understand. I think it's like a family, and I think that I can teach them something. And I see their commitment, their motivation. I think that's fantastic, that I almost can't keep up with them. When I arrive in the morning, nurse, they call me nurse because they know I used to work in a hospital. Nurse, what are we going to do today? So I always prepare at home, and then I can help them all. Because sometimes you have a group of 30. But I say, hey guys, help me out here. Because you know, as my grandmother taught me, the devil finds work for idle hands. If someone says, no, not today, and all the others follow, okay. I don't know how to say this, but it is exactly as my daughter put it. It is my life, it's my passion.
Nou, het vrijwillig werk, wat levert het mij op?
Well, voluntary work, what is there to win? In any case, it is certain it doesn't lead to more money in my wallet. But it definitely gives me a lot of satisfaction when you see that you're doing something useful and that it also makes other people happy. For me, that is more important than money. I'm really glad I worked hard when I was younger, and I'm on benefit now. I don't have a problem with that at all. And I also see now that the work I do is appreciated by the group for which I do that work. And that gives me great, huge satisfaction, me as well as my family. That's what I do it for.
Als ik kijk gewoon naar of ik vrienden heb.
Volunteer work, if I just look at the Moroccan community, is not a usual thing for us, because we didn't grow up in a society like the Netherlands, where volunteer work is organized. Here in the Netherlands, volunteer work is organized. In Morocco, for example, it isn't. You just do something for someone else, for a friend or a family or whatever. You do that, it's normal. But you don't call it volunteer work. It's just a responsibility you have towards each other and you just do it.
Het is gewoon een verantwoordelijkheid wat je hebt jegens elkaar en dat doe je gewoon.
Voor mij is het bijzonder leuk om vrijwilliger te zijn.
For me, it is particularly nice to be a volunteer because now that I'm retired, I can be of use to my neighborhood. So I can pass on my experience and wisdom to the young and old, and so share life together.
En zodoende met elkaar het leven te delen.
Nou, Molukse ouderen zijn bijna vanzelfsprekend vrijwilliger.
It is almost standard practice that older Malaccan people do voluntary work when it concerns their own people, their own target group. But what we see increasingly is that they have taken up voluntary work in Dutch institutions as well. And the reason is quite obvious. There are of course elderly people who don't live in a Malaccan area. And then they are a member of a Dutch church and they are volunteers there. But sometimes they do voluntary work for a Dutch voluntary organization, for example, because then they might recruit more volunteers to help organize a Malaccan event, or because then they are assured of the council's support, or just because they like it.
Of gewoon omdat ze het leuk vinden.
What is very important for our organization are of course the volunteers. I would like to mention them separately in the sense that they are people who are dedicated to our foundation, heart and soul. And we also have very many volunteers. For example, I believe here at Patria, in any case, we have over 100. And all those volunteers have their own responsibilities. They all have a particular task within our organization, from putting the chairs out for church on Sundays to accompanying people to the hospital, or assisting at outings or helping at the table. And then you see that there are also volunteers who are well into their 80s. And that there is of course also a social element to it, that here at a particular moment they start mixing with other people again, and that they gain something from that interaction. But that they can also offer real support in doing basic things, not covered by official care services.
Het vrijwilligerswerk geeft mij een stukje voldoening, dat ik iets meer kan betekenen voor een ander.
Being a voluntary worker gives me satisfaction, that I can mean something for someone else. It also offers me an opportunity for development, so I can be versatile in the work that I do. I've made lots of new relationships and I've got new contacts in a place where I can combine this with a bit of relaxation and coziness. And my work also contributes to society, that you can help each other.
In de samenleving dat je elkaar kunt helpen. Moet je gewoon doen.
Just do it, because that's the first step. And I had exactly the same, that I thought, I can't do it. But I started, and then you see that in fact it rolls on from there, and with a bit of effort it just works out.
En met een stukje inspanning komt het vanzelf goed.
Housing communities.
We zijn hier in de woongroep Anandjoti, een woongroep voor Surinaamse Hindustaanse ouderen.
We are here in the communal housing facility Anandjoti, a housing community for older people of Surinamese Hindustani descent. This communal project was set up because people who had come from Suriname, they missed that feeling of security, of living in a small village, that kind of desa feeling. They were looking for something similar to that. How can you realize that here? And so we came up with this particular way of living, communal housing. There were already a few for the Dutch people. We went to look and we asked for help, and we came across an organization called Amsterdam Housing Support. And so they showed us the way how to acquire a piece of land, how to get financial support to start building, and who can build it for you, because that is something you can't do yourself. And after many meetings and years that went by, it took about 5 to 6 years, we were allotted this place here in Amsterdam Southeast. And finally the building could begin, and it took about 2 years before we could move in.
En het heeft ongeveer 2 jaar geduurd voordat wij dus hier konden intrekken. Dus het is een woonvorm waar je...
It is a way of housing that allows you to live on your own, independently. Your family is always welcome to visit you, your children and your grandchildren. And in addition, there are a number of joint activities. You can get together to do a course, you can have an information session organized for you. Or you go and play cards together. Or you keep up with your own language, for example by reading from holy books like the Ramayana and other stories. And that gives that feeling of security, what you would miss if you were living in a terraced house somewhere.
In een rijtjeswoning te gaan zitten.
Dit is de Bibi Jamu.
This is Bibi Jamu. Bibi Jamu is the figure of the herbal wise woman from the former Dutch East Indies. And in terms of folklore, she can also be seen in the Indonesia of today. With water in her bucket and medicinal herbs on her back, she had a cure for all complaints. In the 1950s, the Indonesian Dutch came to the Netherlands and took their elderly parents with them, Grandpa and Grandma. Even at that stage, Grandpa and Granny were frail. And then from the beginning, when it was still called old people's homes were developed. And they were often linked to monasteries, where religious people took care of people who newly came to the Netherlands. It was also just after the war, actually, 4 to 5 years after the war. And this is how homes for elderly Dutch East Indians got established. That is the origin of Petra and the Lark, which is now called Rumah Saya, within the Nusantara Foundation.
Goedemorgen. Goedemorgen. Beter dan een slechte dag. Beter dan een slechte dag. Goed begin van de dag, hè?
14 to 15 years ago, we moved into this building. It was all grey concrete. Can you imagine? It was all grey. Nothing had been done to it. And then we had, through a contact we had with someone at the TV channel RTL4, there was this program, and I think it's still there, Your Own Home and Garden. And then a couple came and painted this for us. And we have a toko here. I really like that for buying small things, a few groceries, but also for sambal and soy sauce. So if people need to have something, they can buy it here in the toko. Well, and now we are walking into the communal living room. We eat here together. It's around noon now, and so you see that people are ready for the joint meal. This afternoon there's gado-gado on the menu. Our homes filled a need in the sense that of course you notice we have to do some customer acquisition, that of course we must look at how to get new clients, but we also depend very much on word-of-mouth advertising. I think that 8 out of 10 people who live in our homes heard about it from each other. And often the children say, that is good for mum or dad, because then you are among your own people. And that's the point actually that we cherish here, that they are among their own people, together.
Waar je jaren gewoond hebt, moet je achterlaten. Ben je verdrietig om? Is logisch, hebben wij allemaal ook ervaren.
Where you lived for years and you had to leave that behind makes you sad. That's normal. We have all experienced that. But if someone is new here, then you are accepted immediately. And you click. You know each other by name and surname anyway. And of course, sometimes something happens. Because after all, Indonesian people, they're no exception. But at a particular time it is true that you can really be there for each other. And also if you lose your partner. I went through that myself, and all the attention was like a warm bath, from both the staff and the residents. That is also very important. And of course, also for us, Indian Dutch, the food. You can choose between Indian food or Dutch food. And those are important things when you're getting older.
We zitten nu in het Chinese woongroep Voorleeuw.
We are now in the Chinese communal housing Phu Oi Leo in Amsterdam Southeast, in the Derde Keker Street. There are 56 apartments here and there are 80 elderly people of Chinese descent living here. They have been looking forward to this type of home for years. We were working on it for 10 years and then this place became available. Then they asked us if this was a suitable place. We seized the opportunity with both hands to set up a communal home for these 80 Chinese elderly people.
Je wil misschien naar je land terug, maar omdat je toch hier zo lang
You may want to go back to your country, but because you've lived here for so long, that is no option either. But you're looking for that warm feeling, that familiarity. We talk about the same things. If I say something, then they can fill the gaps. Oh yes, do you remember? It was that street or that street. Well, that makes it so good to live here. And since Chinese are into food, Surinamese people have that too, then we can always talk about that. That's very nice.
Nou, het leuke van hier is dat...
Well, the nice thing about this place is that we also do things together. For example, once a month we cook together. And then a note will be put up on the notice board. Okay, we're going to cook. We start at 11 a.m., but we eat at 2 p.m. And then the 11 o'clock means that we start preparing the vegetables and so on. Well, I can honestly say that only 2 need to know, and then 10 or 11 people show up. Everyone helps, cleaning, kneading dough, do everything. And we're also having a great time together. And then when we are finished, the whole bunch goes home. They're going to get ready and put on something fancy. And they come back and then we share the meal together.
En ze komen terug en dan gaan we lekker samen eten. Er is een mevrouw hier, haar man is overleden. Hier is hij overleden, dus niet lang geleden.
There's a lady and her husband died. Here is where he died, so not so long ago. But she got so much support. And her neighbour on the other side, well, actually she was afraid to sleep on her own. So the neighbour on the other side said, no, I'll come and stay the night. So, yes, well, that went on for 3 weeks. And whenever we see her, we embrace her and ask, how are you feeling? How are you? Then she says, I'm fine, I'm fine. I just mean that people here show they understand what you're going through, you know. And that is actually what you're looking for when you're older.
Vroeger was het zo dat je dus bij je kinderen gaat wonen, want dan help je ze. Je helpt ze met hun kinderen en je past op de kinderen en je kookt.
It used to be the case that you went to live with your children, because then you could help them. You help out with the children, you look after them, you sometimes cook for them and so on. But here in the Netherlands, things are different, because it is a different generation. You sometimes feel a bit unwanted. Because my daughter said, Mum, we're building in the garden, we're building a room, and then you can live there. I say, no, I don't want that either, because I have the feeling, because I'm old, that they're watching me all the time. And you don't want that. You still want to be independent. But you want to help them too, because we also help our children pick up our grandchildren from school. But here we live on our own. That is much more important. Then the children visit, come by, they ring, phone each other every day, but you live on your own. You can do what you like. If you want to eat at 10 o'clock, then you eat at 10 o'clock. And if you want to eat at 3, then you eat at 3. But not at set times as they would like. And if there's a little thing wrong with you, then they say, oh dear, we have to see a doctor and so on. We don't want that, because we're independent. We may be old, but we want to remain independent.
Een van de positieve punten van gezamenlijk wonen van mensen met dezelfde afkomst is de gezamenlijke herkenbaarheid.
One of the positive sides of living with people from the same ethnic group is the shared background, so that there are always lots of people dropping by, and you can do that without setting a date first. And this always involves lots of food and the bustle and hustle that comes with that. But also when there is pain. When someone has died, then you don't need so many words. I mean, for people to make clear to each other how they feel.
Ideaal oud worden wil volgens mij iedereen.
To get old in an ideal setting is, I think, what everyone wants, regardless of their origin. I think everyone, and that includes elderly Malaccan people as well, want that safe environment. And for me, safe it means a familiar environment, which means that there are a number of cultural values that need to be incorporated in a particular residential environment.
Het lijkt erop dat over het algemeen de Molukse ouderen...
It seems that generally the group of Malaccan elderly of the first generation, the few that are left because most of them have died, that the best environment to grow old in is that type of communal living. They prefer to live together. But nowadays we are dealing with a second generation of elderly people. That is the generation that came to the Netherlands at a young age. You might say they grew up and were raised here. So they will make use of the Dutch care system, but they simply don't. People who, when they are old, they mustn't have any obligations, like now, must. Now it's their turn. If someone thinks that he really wants to grow old together with other Moroccans, give him that option to live with other Moroccans, because he has something to share with those Moroccans. If someone thinks that he really wants to grow old together with other Turkish people, then give him that option to live with other Turks, because they have something to share. And for me, the ideal of living here in the Netherlands is that you yourself are free to choose how to grow old.